A very good morning to all of you here, and thank you so much for spending your Saturday with us. I hope you had a nice tea break. So my name is Tiju, and I will be speaking to all of you about sudden cardiac arrest during exercise. Very important topic, and I hope you all learn something from it today. So, okay, what will I cover today? So first things first is what is sudden cardiac arrest or sudden cardiac death? So the short form that we use is SCA or SCD. Firstly, how to recognize sudden cardiac arrest and how to differentiate it from other causes. And obviously we are in a place where we try and prevent all these bad things from happening. So how do we screen for conditions that can lead to sudden cardiac arrest or sudden cardiac death? So why do we do it? How do we do it? And who do we screen? And of course, most of you here or some of you here deal with athletes as well. So we'll cover the different causes of sudden cardiac arrest in athletes as well as non-athletes. And finally, this will overlap with Professor Marcus Ong's talk later on, but the importance of early detection and resuscitation to prevent further out-of-hospital collapses or prevent bad outcomes. So you can see in the slide, there are a few pictures. So the first one is, of course, Christian Eriksen, the football player who collapsed on the pitch during the Euro tournament. The second one is from USA, NFL League, where Damar Hamlin just collapsed after being hit in the chest. And then the last one is actually one of our national servicemen, non-athlete, but passed away after taking part in some exercise training session. So first things first, what do we define as sudden cardiac arrest? So cardiac arrest or death that occurs either during sport participation or within a short time, usually about 1 hour within sport participation. So it's quite a straightforward and simple definition. And this is one of the infographics from the US, the American College of Cardiology. There are many similar infographics and they all emphasize the same thing. So it is actually the #1 medical cause of death in young athletes. And what is the important thing for us to take note here? So I've highlighted the box in red at the bottom. These are warning signs. Because, there are studies to show that people who actually have sudden cardiac arrest or death, that is the final event. But prior to that, the majority, almost 80%, have had some sort of symptoms. And these symptoms can serve as warning signs to get the person evaluated and checked beforehand. So if you ignore the warning signs, then they might actually progress and lead to a full-blown sudden cardiac arrest. What are these warning signs? Of course, passing out is very drastic. So passing out is always abnormal. Should not ignore it. Feeling lightheaded or dizziness, chest pain or discomfort, feeling breathlessness, and of course, seizures is also very drastic. So a lot of all these, for example, the dizziness, chest pain, and shortness of breath, they should be out of the ordinary. So normally you shouldn't have this, but if you experience this or one of the people you train or your athletes experiences this, then you should advise him or her to go and get checked. Now, I will play a video. This is available on the internet, but it is of a sudden cardiac arrest. And let's just take a look.
has any history of seizure? History of seizure? Can't breathe. Looks like seizure. Seizure. Looks like seizure. Breathing. No breathing. No breathing?
Okay, now what was the main thing over here? The video was 1.5 minutes long, 90 seconds. But what did it feel like? It felt like an eternity, right? Every second counts. There are many, many things that you can conclude from the video, but we're not here to discuss that. The only thing I want to emphasize is that every second counts. It is very important to recognize sudden cardiac arrest, and that early intervention is absolutely crucial. So unfortunately, this athlete passed away. He's a Chinese badminton athlete who was taking part in a badminton tournament. So you can see that there is the medical attention only came in slightly later on. Okay, but this is not the forum to discuss this. I just want you to recognize what is sudden cardiac arrest, and we will go into that a few more features later on. So cardiac arrest. So this infographic is available on our Singapore Heart Foundation website. The term arrest means stopping. So the heart literally stops. It can stop meaning completely not pump, or it can stop in a way that it actually is shaking. So normally when the heart pumps, it squeezes the blood to circulate it to the rest of the body. But in some cases, the electrical signals are all haywire and the heart does not actually squeeze. The muscles just shake on the spot, so the blood doesn't actually get pumped out. So this is also considered a cardiac arrest. Usually it's a very sudden thing, and as you saw earlier on, whoever experiences this will suddenly just drop without any warning. So it is actually an electrical problem where there is either no electricity or the electricity is haywire. So time is of the essence. And this is actually quite different from a heart attack. A heart attack is, we can go into that later on, but basically it's caused by blockages to the blood flow of the heart. And normally there is some pre-warning, like chest pain, discomfort. It can be 5, 10, 15 minutes. Of course, if a heart attack is serious enough, it can lead to a cardiac arrest eventually. Okay, but there are differences, as you can see. So another point to take note is that earlier on you might notice that the athlete that I shown who collapsed, there were still some movements, and if you look closely, the chest actually still appeared to be moving a little bit. Now this is sometimes confused with normal breathing, but it is actually not normal at all. It is actually the body's response to struggle to suck in air to keep itself alive. So this is called agonal breathing. All right, so agonal breathing is very irregular, labored, and it can even sound like it's gasping. So it should not be mistaken for normal breathing at all. So if you see somebody who has collapsed and has some very abnormal movement of the chest, don't assume that the person is still breathing. Just assume the worst, so that he or she can be, the CPR can be administered as soon as possible. Now let's move on to sudden cardiac arrest in athletes. Okay, so as you can see from this slide, athletes come in all shapes and sizes, and the risk of sudden cardiac arrest or death is also quite different. So this figure shows how common sudden cardiac arrest is. Thankfully, overall, it is not common at all. 1 to 50,000 people, and in certain higher risk people, it's 1 to 15,000. You can see that for the bottom of the slide, usually sudden cardiac arrest is much more rare in female athletes, so less than 1 in 100,000. Then as you go higher, actually the more common incidents, because all these studies, all these registries, all these papers, they are much commonly done in the overseas countries, and they found that actually the athletes who are of black descent, Okay, the African Americans, they have a higher risk of cardiac arrest. And certain sports like football and even basketball, for some reason, they're higher likelihood of having sudden cardiac arrest. And why do athletes have a higher risk than non-athletes is mainly because of the exercise intensity. So the potential trigger of whatever they have is higher. So going into specific causes, this is a slightly busy slide, but let me just break it down for you. These are causes of sudden cardiac death in young athletes. And what do we define by young? Less than 35. Don't worry, I'm not young also. So 35 is the general cutoff for the age for young versus, we don't call it old, we call master. Okay, master versus young, all right? So there are 3 circles over here. Focus on the white colored word. So either there is a problem with the heart structure, so structural cardiac abnormalities, or there is a problem with the electrical circuit of the heart, electrical cardiac abnormalities, and finally on the bottom right is acquired cardiac abnormalities. That means nothing wrong with the heart itself, but something happened later on in life. Okay, so quickly, let's talk about the structural ones first. So structural, I put 2 examples. On the left is hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. This is a condition where the heart muscle is very thick. I'll show you another slide on that later on. So the common ones, those who are master people here, you may have heard of Mark Vivian Foe. He was one of the very high-profile athletes who collapsed, I think, 20 years ago and passed away. And Christian Eriksen one, we're actually not too sure. So this newspaper, this article may not be fully accurate. But Mark Vivian Foe definitely had hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. The next one on the right is from Singapore. It's actually not too long ago. One of the sports school students, I think it was mentioned earlier on as well. It is a congenital coronary artery anomaly. In other words, it's an inborn problem where the blood supply of the heart is coming from a different direction. And because of the way the blood vessel flows, it is compressed between 2 larger blood vessels, and that leads to the blood flow to the heart being cut off, especially during intense exercise. So that is actually an inborn problem from birth. Electrical cardiac abnormalities is where there is nothing wrong with the structure of the heart. It looks all right, it functions all right, everything is in place, but the electricity going through the heart is not going well. So there can be triggers that give rise to very abnormal heart rhythms that lead to the heart shaking, like what I mentioned earlier on. So this Olympic athlete, you can see here, actually she won gold, has long QT syndrome. So that's one of the electrical problems. And finally, the acquired one. So I showed Dharma Hamlin, the example. He had commotio cordis, which is where there is a very large impact directly on the heart, exactly at the point where a certain point in the electrical system, and that also can trigger the abnormal rhythm, right? So of all these causes, what are the commonest? Because all these are generally rare. So of the rare causes, what are more common? So in the past, maybe 5-10 years ago, it was these 2, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy and arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathy. So the figure of the heart on the top is hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. You see my red arrow over there? If you can appreciate the normal heart on the left versus the abnormal heart on the right, you will see that the heart muscle is extremely thick. Okay, can you see the arrow pointing to this part, the top right-hand corner? So when the heart muscle is very thick, 2 things can happen. Either when the heart squeezes, the outlet here where the blood should go is blocked. So the heart cannot pump blood to the circulation and blood supply is cut off and the person faints. Either that, or because the heart muscle is so thick, the electrical rhythm through the heart goes haywire. This happens when there is, stress to the body, whether it's mental stress, physical stress, stress from illness, and then the electrical circuits go haywire. Right, so that's hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. For arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathy, in the past, we used to think it affects the right side of the heart, but now we know both left and right side can be affected. So in this case, the muscle of the heart is actually abnormal. It is actually not fully muscle. It's replaced by scar tissue, fibrous tissue, fatty tissue. So the right side of the heart or the affected muscles of the heart are not pumping well and can beat in a haywire fashion when in times of stress. So what do I mean by all this haywire fashion? So look at the bottom left. So a normal heart rhythm on an electrocardiogram or ECG should look like this on the top. This is normal sinus rhythm. And you can appreciate that at the bottom, it looks like just some squiggly lines. So when you see the squiggly lines, it's life-threatening. It's called ventricular fibrillation. It's when the heart is literally just shaking. And this kind of rhythm responds extremely well to defibrillation or electrical shock. And that's why then AED can save lives. It can shock the rhythm back to normal. Now, what's important here especially for athletes, okay? It's not so easy to pick up all these conditions. Why is that so? Because athletes, especially top athletes, especially athletes who are exercising regularly at a very high intense level, natural changes happen to the heart. In what way? The heart muscle can get thicker, and that is a natural response. The heart muscle should get thicker if you're exercising well. What happens? The heart also gets bigger, and the electrical rhythm also does change. Now, in extreme situations, these changes can also mimic problems like hypertrophic cardiomyopathy and arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathy. So there is an overlap called the gray zone. Okay? On the one hand, you exercise, you have changes in the heart. On the other hand, somebody who has this actual problem can also have similar features. So it is a difficult process to differentiate what is normal and related to exercise versus what is abnormal to begin with. Okay, so that's where all these screening procedures and the evaluations come into play. So let's start a bit in a more basic manner. How do we screen in the first place? Okay, before we even think about how to differentiate the gray area changes, we can use very simple questionnaires to screen our athletes or anyone who is engaged in sports for that matter. So questionnaire can be filled in by the person themselves, and there are a variety of questionnaires available. For those who are involved in football, FIFA has its own questionnaire. There's also questionnaires from the heart associations like American Heart Association, European Association of Cardiology, so on and so forth. The Olympic Committee also has. But they all share common features, which is it's a bit small over here, but basically what I mentioned in the earlier on of the presentation, whether they have any symptoms, any warning signs, have they passed out before, have they had unexplained dizziness or chest pain. So all these enable you to pick up certain abnormalities before it's too late, before anything bad happens. So anytime somebody answers abnormal on any of these questionnaires, it's time to send the person for further checking. Of course, a full screening will include also a physical examination to check whether there are any structural problems in the first place. And finally, the resting 12-lead electrocardiogram or ECG. This is still controversial in certain parts of the world because you need somebody who is trained to look at the ECG. And what do I mean by that? Okay, so this is a typical ECG on the bottom left of an athlete. So there are certain changes we look out for that representative of prolonged, intense exercise. However, as you can tell, these are all squiggly lines. So there's a lot of, uncertainty. There's a lot of nuances, like, changes can be in terms of millimeters. So we have to be very clear about what we look at. But when you do have clear guidelines on interpreting the ECG, it is actually much more sensitive than the history and physical examination in picking up potentially life-threatening problems. Yeah, so this is how an ECG is done. This is Dr. Mok Eng Ren, one of the Singapore previous marathon runners. And so just quickly moving on, this slide shows the latest guidelines on how to interpret the ECG. It is done in a traffic light fashion, so red, orange, and green. And I will not go into too much detail, but basically for those healthcare providers who, like sports medicine doctors, cardiologists, we can use this to help us to differentiate between normal and abnormal. In addition to that, to make it even easier, the Asian Pacific Society of Cardiology, so this is more Asian. So a lot of all these things, I told you, the research, the trials, the data, all from overseas, internationally, sometimes in the West. So Asian Pacific, we have some recommendations to make things simple for those involved in athletes. So I will quickly go through. So we have our own table that tells us what are Asian-centric sports. So you see things like Muay Thai, kickboxing, mixed martial arts, we have Silat, so on and so forth. So we have very Asian-centric sports, and we've categorized them based on how intense the exercise is. Does it affect the dynamic part of the heart more, or is it more of a static, more strength-based? And you see the colors, red, yellow, and green. These are the intensity. So low, moderate, and high intensity based on the color. So what do we recommend? Number one, as long as you are a young and competitive athlete, you should go for some sort of screening. And the screening should have a questionnaire and physical examination. And the questionnaires you've seen just now, what I listed down, that is number one. Number two, the ECG. You should only do an ECG if it has the capacity for mass screening. You cannot screen 10 people and say, oh, you have 100 athletes, you only screen 10. You have to screen all. But if you don't have the resources to screen all, then it might not be so appropriate to do so. So you should have the capacity for mass screening. The standard of the ECG is important. Like I mentioned earlier, every millimeter counts. So if you put the stickers in the incorrect position, it could lead to abnormal readings. And finally, it should be interpreted by somebody trained to do so. So unfortunately, not everyone is trained in the same manner. Like for example, the family doctors, the GPs may not have the same expertise to interpret the ECG. So you need, for example, cardiologists or sports medicine doctors to do so. And then, if any part of the screening is abnormal, whether it's the questionnaire, whether it's the physical examination, or whether it's the ECG, the athlete should be referred for further testing. Right? For low-intensity sport, we felt that the resources needed to screen is too much. So we did not recommend it as a standard, but it can be done ad hoc, of course. And same goes for master athletes. So master athletes, I'll quickly go through. And I'll skip this one. For those involved in athletes with heart disease, the key word now is shared decision-making. So Singapore is still conservative. There's a good chance that once you find something abnormal in your athlete, you will say, okay, I'm sorry, you go and study. You quit, disqualified from sport. But overseas, shared decision-making is crucial because sometimes this is their life, this is their career. They're willing to accept the risk. So as long as the family member, the athlete, the coach, the team, the whole infrastructure is aware of the risks involved in the athlete with heart disease, and they accept that things may happen, but there's an emergency action plan. Sometimes the athlete may still be allowed to participate. Very good example is Christian Eriksen. He had a life-threatening event. His heart stopped, but yet now he's still playing at a top-level football with a device implanted in his heart. Okay, a quick one on non-athletes. Okay, so non-athletes, which are actually the vast majority of us. Okay, recreational athletes. What is the commonest cause of sudden cardiac arrest in this group? Okay, it is coronary artery disease, which is accumulation of plaque in the blood vessels of the heart, leading to more and progressive narrowing and blockage. So this study is from 2001 to 2008, and this is a local study. The majority of sudden cardiac arrest is coronary artery disease, right? And unfortunately, the survival rate is very poor, 5.5%. A lot of it is also because there's low rates of bystander CPR. I think Prof. Marcus will go into that a bit later on. Now, moving on 10 years, is also, I think, study on local data. Also, same, ischemic heart disease, which is also referencing coronary artery disease. Also, the most common exercise-related cause of sudden cardiac arrest, whether it is competitive, non-competitive, long or short distance versus younger or older, is still the commonest in Singapore. So how do we screen non-athletes? Okay, In the basic screening, because most of the recreational athletes actually they are an older age group. So if you saw those two papers earlier on, they are actually in the mid-50s, the sudden cardiac arrest, the average age. So go and screen for the problems that can cause blockages, high blood pressure, diabetes, high cholesterol. And there are lots of screening initiatives that the GPs, the polyclinics can do at a very low cost or even free for some individuals. Of course, if you want to do something more, then you need to do further evaluation. For example, if you want to run a marathon. So if you have pre-existing high blood pressure, high cholesterol, so on and so forth, you might need further testing, for example, a stress test, a treadmill test, or even a scan. But that one is ad hoc, okay, depending on what you want to participate in. So endurance events is possible after a heart event. This gentleman over here, he has run 30 over marathons, and he has been through the heart rehab after his recent heart attack and just finished Standard Chartered Marathon last month. Okay, so this is possible with structured training. Of course, some tips I usually like to give for athletes or regular people wanting to run endurance events is that do not race if you are ill. If you're already having chronic conditions, you must take your medication. Don't skip it. And most importantly, listen to your body. Don't push through the symptoms. You've heard Prof. Jason talking about the effect of heat. So environmental factors are important. If it's really hot, you may have to taper down your intensity during the race. Remember to hydrate and refuel. Race at the training pace and try not to sprint at the finish. You want to get a nice finisher photo. You don't want your face to look all, weird when you push through to the end, right? So take it easy at the last part, because the last part is when all the collapses happen. I know I'm overrunning a little bit. I'll just quickly show this video. So I wanted to ask questions, but I think I'll skip that. So this is not sudden cardiac arrest. Okay, this is because the intense pressure taken when the weightlifter lifts the weights temporarily cuts off the blood supply to the brain, and then he faints. Okay, there's a bit more to the video where he wakes up instantaneously and is actually walking around. So it's quite clear that there is a different trigger. So you need to recognize that this is different. But of course, he still needs attention in case he hit his head against the weights and get a head injury and so on and so forth. So it's important. Now, this is the last video I have. Pay attention to the guy tying his shoelaces. Okay, in the interest of time, I'll skip that. I'll stop that early again. So that was a sudden cardiac arrest. That happened in Italy a few months ago, quite recent. It's a footballer. What's the thing I want to emphasize here? Early recognition, early attention. So that footballer was received attention straight away. He received CPR straight away, and he survived fully. Okay, so this basically early recognition saves lives. This last slide is basically to show that what are some initiatives that has been done overseas. In Japan, there are medics with AEDs scattered throughout the course, whether on bicycle or whether on foot, and they're clearly demarcated. You see AED over there. And because of these initiatives, they were able to slash the response time to less than 1 minute. There have been many collapses, 42 runners over about 13 years, 3.2 million runners in total. And the time between the witness arrest and the start of CPR, less than 1 minute. Time between collapse and administering of the shock, 2 minutes. And as a result, they have excellent outcomes, more than 90%. Just now you saw my survival rate, 5.5% locally. So having all these initiatives does help. Okay, so I shall skip all these. Basically, my emphasis is, you can't prevent every single cardiac arrest, but you can stop the consequences by administrating CPR. And we do have a project reset out there, some of you have seen. It's a chance for you to participate and know more about your heart health. So I encourage you to go to visit the booth. Thank you very much.